Bienvenidos, Ushamdi, and welcome to this Hut8 networking Techtorial where we're going to continue our conversation about basic ASA configuration tasks. So just to do a quick level set, at this point, we've received our ASA 5505 from wherever we purchased it, eBay, or whether we're at work and we have a 5505 that we're going to be experimenting with. We've done the password recovery. We've done all of the file system cleanup. In other words, we've removed any of the files that we don't want. And in this case, we've actually formatted disk 0, which is also known as flash. And so we're going to be starting from 100% scratch here, and we're going to pick up right where we left off with the same two ASA firewalls. It looks like we've got some sequencing here. I'm going to build the slide out right now. We'll build the whole slide out. There we go. All right, so here are the tasks that we're going to be looking at in Module 2. Now, one of the most common questions is which ASA image is right for you? Well, there are a couple different versions of the ASA 5505 firewall. Some of the earlier versions and some of the earliest versions of the ASA 5505 came with 256 megabytes of memory. Now, if you have one of the earlier versions, and remember, we can see how much memory we have when we type show version. Now, if you have the model, one of the earlier models, and I've got both types of models here. I've got a version 04 and a version 11. The version 04 has 256 megs of RAM. The version 11 has 512. So if you've got an earlier version, 256 megs of RAM or memory, you want to use 91716. And I'm actually going to explain why we would use 91716. And with the ASA 5505 later models with 512 megs of RAM, you would want to use 924. And 924, both of those versions of code, those are the latest and greatest. But don't take my word for it. We're going to be taking a look at the release notes that actually spell out the semantics, right, or the specific details regarding why with 256 megs, we don't want to run, and I don't want to say we can't. You could try to load that 924 image with only 256 megs of memory, but chances are you could run into some issues. So we'll see in the release notes why that is. Now, getting your ASA image. So if you don't have an entitlement, my recommendation is when you go to order, right, if you're looking to buy it off of eBay, is to check with your seller. Maybe your seller has the ability to upgrade that ASA. But you would go to Cisco.com, and so let's pull the web page up here. So we're at Cisco.com. If I go to software downloads right here, we're going to click on software downloads. Let's make this a little bit bigger here. And let's see, make it a little easier to look at. And you can see that I've done some downloading here for both work as well as home. And let's go to security, which is right here. We're going to go to firewalls and adaptive security appliances. Now you'll notice it says 5500X, right? Now the non-X ASA 5500 series, those can also be found under ASA 55X. However, the 55Xs, those are the newer versions. You can see here, I have a 5510 that I use for my home network, right? So you could get your 5510 software here. And then here is the 5505. And this is what we're interested in. We're looking for the software that would go on the chassis. Now, let's say you're migrating from a checkpoint firewall. They've got a nice conversion tool here that you can download. Here is the ASA operating system, right? So this is where you would get the system software that the ASA is going to use to run, and right above it is your ASDM. In other words, your ASA device manager software, which gives us access to a GUI. So if I was to click on adaptive security appliance software, And again, this typically tends to cause quite a bit of confusion because there's so many releases here, right? And the question is, well, the latest is 9.2.4, so do I just download the latest? Do I get one of the later 8 versions of code? Remember 8.2.5, right? You saw that on one of the ASAs before we deleted it and formatted that disk 0 or flash drive. So this is the big question, and I've already clicked. You can see we've got release notes here, and so I've clicked on the release notes already. And if you come down here to 9.2, right, and this is why it's always a good idea to take a quick peek at the release notes, and especially there's a huge payoff here with the 5505 because, and I'm looking down at my keyboard, I would like to make this a little larger, a little easier for you to see. Because when we get right here, this important notes section, right? So these do become very, very important in terms of notes. And so I want you to focus right now on this second note. And let's change our color here to red. So this second bullet right here. And this is why I was making the comments earlier. So you can see here the ASA 55 with 256 megabytes of DRAM. So starting in version 8.3, the DRAM requirement for the 5505 was increased to 512. Now, that was if you were using this unlimited hosts license or the Security Plus license with failover enabled, right? If you were not using that, so again, if you did not use the unlimited host license, so basically the base license, and that's what we have on both of our ASAs is the base license. So then the ASA could continue to operate with 256 megabytes of memory. Now, that was up until, as of version 9.2 and later, all ASA 5505 licenses require 512 megabytes of memory. If you only have the 256 meg ASA image, or 256 megs, the ASA image may not load into memory. And so that's where my comment comes from. So the 9.2 is if we have the 512 megabytes of memory, and we have a version 11 ASA. It'll be the second one that we list there, or I'm sorry, the first one we list. And then if you don't have that, right, if you've got the 256 megs of memory, we cannot go to the 9.2 branch, right? So we'd have to stop at a 9.1 branch, and that's that 9.1716. And you're probably asking yourself, well, wait a second, Travis, you seem pretty certain about that 9.1716. Why is that? Well, let's skip over here, and we actually I got bit by this in a production environment prior to finding out what was going on. So this is a bug, and it's a very recent bug that has popped up, and we refer to it as the 213-day bug. And when we look at what's going on, you can see here 9178, right? This problem affects ASA and FTD versions, and it lists out the versions that it affects. And so 9178 and higher. So this is why I was very specific about 9.1716. And basically what it is for whatever reason, the ARP table, and they've got a better description of it here, they just don't respond, right, or won't receive or respond to ARP packets for whatever reason after 213 days. And we had this happen on an older, it was a backup to a backup location, but it ended up happening, and we hit that 213 days, and literally no traffic was passing through the firewall. So here are the known affected releases, right? And if we look over here, this is where we want to be. You can see the known fixed releases, and right there, and it actually cut it off for some reason, but there's the 91716. You can barely see it there, and 92420, right? So those are the versions of code that we're going to be working with. But again, be aware that this bug is out there, and it's definitely something you want to avoid. In a lab environment, not a big deal. You can see that. How do you resolve it? Well, you could just simply reboot it, right? And that's the sort of the kludge fix, or the hack would be to simply reboot it. The real way, right, the way that you want to address this is you want to come in and you want to make sure you've got the right version of code. So 91716 and then 92420, right? So those are the code versions that don't have this bug. So again, the release notes, very important to check those release notes out. So now that we know where to get the software, how to get the software, which versions that we're looking for, why there's a difference between the 256 meg and 512 meg versions of the ASA 5505, now we can move forward and load the ASA operating system that we want. In fact, we can even put the ASDM software on there at the same time. So remember, we are at the ROMmon prompt. And you might remember way back in the day that one of the ways that you could get an image onto an older ISR was you could do I think it's a Z modem transfer, and that would just take an incredible amount of time, right? But you can use this TFTP download command. So let's get on to the command line here. So here you can see we're on the first ASA that we've got listed here. And let me check because, and I think we're going to see, yeah, this has got to be the one with 512 mega memory. And so this is also the one that has a TFTP server connected to it. So you're definitely going to need a TFTP server. There's many free versions out there for the Windows platform, a couple for the Mac. This one that I'm using is going to be used, I'm using it with a Mac. So how do we get things going here? Well, remember, TFTP DNLD. Now, this command right here, this is how we're going to initiate the TFTP. But we first need to set some settings. And the reason I put it in there, I did that intentionally, is because we want to see what is it asking us to set. Well, I need to set the address. And what is the address? It's not the address of the TFTP server. That is going to be set with the server variable. The address is going to be the address on the Ethernet 00 interface. And again, you're probably wondering, well, how do you know it's the Ethernet 00 interface? Well, that is the interface that's used by default, or the port that's used by default. And we're going to see that I can go ahead, excuse me, if I don't have my TFTP server connected to Ethernet 00, I can change it. And in this case, we're actually going to do that. I've plugged it into Ethernet 07 so that we can see what this is going to look like. So let's go ahead and get started here. So the address, and again, remember, this is the address for the ASA. So I'll say 192.168.1.1. I'm going to set the server image, not the server image, sorry, the server address to 192.168.1.10. We're going to set the image variable, and this again, this is the ASA image, which I want to pull onto this ASA. So now this one's got the 512 meg, but that's okay. Let's stay with ASA 917-16-K8.bin. Now, remember, I'm not plugged into Ethernet 00, which is the port on the back of the ASA 5505 that's going to be used by default. So I need to say Ethernet 0/7, right? And you can see link is up, right? We get the MAC address for the port. And now this is when I would issue that TFTP download. The reason that it didn't start the process or attempt to start the process is because all of these variables, these three mandatory variables, right? I have to have the address of the ASA set. I have to have the address of the TFTP server set. I have to have an image identified and set, right? Port is optional if the TFTP server is not in Ethernet. I'm sorry, it's optional if you're plugged into Ethernet 00, but if you're not plugged into Ethernet 00, you want to set that port variable. So now I'm going to say TFTP DNLD, and I'm going to hit enter. And you can see right here, it gives us some of the other variables that we could set, right? I could set address, the server, the gateway, the port, the VLAN is untagged right now. Here's the image, right? Retry timeout, link timeout. And so what's going to happen here? Well, you can see that this is just simply going to time out on us. And so we're going to allow it to time out. So it's trying to make that TFTP happen. It's timing out. And we'll give it a second here. In fact, let me go ahead and pause and we'll allow this to time out. We'll come back when it's done. All right, so we can see that the TFTP failure here, we had 20 retries, right? And so that's what this variable is for down here. And we had to wait. And the reason is that the TFTP server that I'm using actually has Wi-Fi enabled, which is on the same network, that 192.168.1, right? So we got that fortuitous failure here where it times out. So let's rerun that TFTP download and now take a look at what happens, right? So again, had the Wi-Fi setting and I had it hardwired into the back of the ASA, but we were using the same network. I thought I had turned the Wi-Fi off, but it ended up causing that failure there. So now we're TFTPing this image into disk 0, which is synonymous with flash. And so it's going to TFTP it, and then you're going to see there'll be a break where it's actually then going to copy it from memory to disk 0. And so we'll give this a second here to complete and to copy over. And now once this happens, we're going to have a valid ASA image that'll be sitting in the flash directory, right, on flash or disk 0. And then all we have to type is reset in order to reload the ASA, which will by default boot to the first viable image that it can find on disk 0 or in flash. And so you can see there it's launching the TFTP image. We've got all of the bytes have been copied down. And we'll give this a second to load here. In fact, let me go ahead and pause again so we don't have to sit through and wait. We'll be right back. All right, so we are back. In fact, we've got a great error message right here. Remember that upgrade startup errors, all those files that we can get rid of. So here's one of them, right? Because we have no startup config. It's been completely removed. If I were to scroll back, we've got a bunch of licensing information here for some software, for some GNU Foundation. But again, you can see where we were loading here, right? And there is that DOS FSCK that's going to run. So from the previous module, it's going to do that file system check. It's going to make sure everything is good. And we are now booted and up. And so this is where it's going to ask me, do I want to pre-configure the firewall now through the interactive prompts? And so this takes us right to our next module, which is where we're going to take a look at some of the basic ASA configuration tasks. We're going to see how to do some of the configuration following this method here. We're going to walk through interactive prompts. We're going to wipe out the configuration. And we're also going to configure things from scratch, right? We're going to configure things from the CLI from scratch. So I'm going to pause very briefly here and go ahead and load the iOS image on the other ASA, and then we're going to start module 3, where we take a look now at configuring our ASA. So this is how you get your ASA image into disk 0 or into flash from the ROM prompt. And if we were up and operational, right? And let me say no here, actually. We'll go ahead and we'll walk this through quickly. And this is going to get us a little ahead of where we're at, but I'm just going to configure a few things here. So let's get into global config. And this notice that you get here, you can just simply answer no to that. And we're not providing any information, right? So if I was to say do, I'm going to have to say do. So if I was to say show run, right, you can see that we've got these interfaces here, and these interfaces are all shut down. And we've got some VLANs, or we have a single VLAN, VLAN 1, that's got no information whatsoever. So if I was to go into interface VLAN 1 and say IP address 192.168.1.1, and we'll set it as a /24, we'll say no shut, name if, and I'll call it inside, right? And we'll definitely be coming back to go over the semantics of this later. So I'm just saying that this is my inside interface, right? Now, if I get into interface Ethernet 07, remember that's where the TFTP server is located. And I would say, just like you would, I would say switch port access VLAN 1. Now, very, very similar to what you do when you're dealing with a switch, right? With layer 2 ports, and you want to make those ports the member, right, to participate in a specific VLAN. And when I say VLAN, that virtual local area network, think of it as a VLAN is a subnet, is a broadcast domain, right? So I'm putting this layer 2 port because, again, the ASA 5505, the ports on the back are layer 2 ports. We kind of do this little SVI trick here, that switched virtual interface, and then we put the layer 2 ports into that VLAN. So here is my layer 3 software, right, or switched virtual interface, and I take my layer 2 port and make it a member of that subnet, that VLAN, that broadcast domain, okay? And so this is how you do it on the 5505. On the ASA 5510s and later, the ports are layer 3. They're routed ports, right? So the configuration here is a little different, but again, the premise of this Techtorial, these series of videos, is to talk about the 5505 because they're very affordable, they're easy to get, and they're very functional, right? So we've put it into that VLAN. I'm going to say no shut here. So if I say ping 192.168.1.10, you can see I can ping the TFTP server. So let me say dir, right? Or I could say show flash, right? If we wanted to look at additional information. Excuse me. So you can see we've got our log directory, we've got the crypto archive, we've got that core dump, and here's the upgrade air files. Now, I can go ahead and we can get rid of this if I was to say delete. And remember, all I'd have to say is U**, and it's going to get rid of that update errors file. And that's fine, right? Because we're not going to be using that file at all. So we saw how to get the image from the TFTP server from the ROM prompt. Now let's go ahead and see how would I do this if I wanted to pull in another image. Because remember, we're running 91716, but this ASA, and I hope it's this ASA, it is, this is one of the version 11, a much later version of the Cisco ASA 5505, and it's got 512 megs of RAM. So I could upgrade to 92420 code, right, or 924 code. So let's go ahead and do that. So I would say copy TFTP, TFTP : and we're going to put it in flash. And I could say disk 0. right? So, and this is, we already have the ASA operating system on here. We have a valid image, but now I'm looking to upgrade. Maybe this is being used in production, let's say, and it's not something that we have from scratch. And so this is going to prompt me and walk me through the steps. So address or name of the remote host, 192.168.1.10. This is my TFTP server, right? So this is the equivalent of setting that server variable to a value. The source file name, it's going to be ASA 924-K8.bin. And then the destination file name, right? So we'll hit enter and take a look at that, right? So now we're pulling down the latest and greatest ASA image that will work on this version of the ASA with 512 megs of memory. And so we'll give this a second here. In fact, let me pause this because we're going to take a look at one final way to get that image on there, and we'll be right back. All right, so we've copied the image over. Excuse me. If I type dir, you can see we've got the ASA 924-K8.bin, and that's the file that we wanted. Now, remember that dir command we talked about. So far, let's go ahead and do a quick level set here, quick review. We looked at how we get an ASA OS image on here from the ROM-mon prompt, which means we formatted the flash. We're definitely starting from ground zero, day zero. We just saw how you would use TFTP. Let's say this is an operational ASA and you're just looking to upgrade the ASA operating system. So we saw how you do that with the the copy command, TFTP : and then disk 0 or flash : right? And so now what we're going to do is if I was to say dir/all, right? This would list out all the directories I have. But if I was to say dir, and I believe there is a, what would it be? So there's a USB port on the back, and I'm assuming because I don't have a USB plugged in there, that we are not going to see. Yeah, so it's not even going to show it. So there are two USB ports on the back of the ASA 5505. And so you might be able to take a USB stick. Again, you'd have to format it. And typically, and the reason that I don't typically use the USB sticks is because if it's not a Cisco, purchased from Cisco USB stick, typically you tend to run into some issues. Sometimes you can get it to work, but it's very, very finicky, right? Very picky, the Cisco hardware, in terms of whether or not it's going to allow you to use a non-Cisco USB. I have gotten it to work before, but I've also struggled with it on multiple occasions where the hardware simply will not recognize a non-Cisco USB. And so that takes us to a great stopping point right now, a nice waypoint into or at the end of module 2 here, where we're now going to go ahead and look at how do we configure the basic settings, right? How do we go ahead and set some things up on the ASA so that we can now take that next step and become one step closer to having a functional ASA firewall. All right, well, thank you so much for watching this module. Hopefully it's cleared up any questions that you had regarding the ASA operating system, how you get the image on there via TFTP from ROM-mon, how you would get the image on there via TFTP when the ASA is up and operational, and we'll talk about the boot system variable as we move on. In fact, we can real quickly, I can take care of that boot system variable. So remember, we're running, if I say show version, we're running 9.17.16 here, right? But I wanted to upgrade to 9.2.4. So how do I ensure that that is the image that gets loaded into memory? If I could type config T, and what you would say is boot system, and I'll say flash : ASA 924.K8.bin. So this is going to hard code, right? You can see there, converting flash : ASA to disk 0. Right? So, but it's going to hard code the image that we use to boot this ASA. So now let me go ahead and say reload. and it's going to walk through the reload process. And this is what happens when you have, if you were to have multiple ASA operating system images in disk 0, this is how you would hard code it to boot to a specific image. And you can see right there, take a look at that. What image did it pick? Did it pick 917? No, it picked the 924 image. And again, that command is just simply boot system, and then you could say flash, you saw it converted it. So then you would say disk 0 : and then the name of the image that you wish to boot. All right, so we'll let this finish out here, and that is going to conclude this module on upgrading the ASA, or just getting an ASA operating system onto your ASA firewall. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next module, Module 3, where we begin and go over the different ways that we can put the basic settings onto the ASA.